Okay, so today we're diving into some pretty murky waters. Um, we're talking about calls for impeachment of federal judges.
Yeah, this is getting a lot of attention.
It really is,
And there are some really strong opinions out there.
definitely. And we're going to try to sift through it all. We've got reports from a pretty diverse set of sources,
Mhm.
Fox News, MSNBC, Breitbart, Politico, to see what's fueling these calls for impeachment and, what could happen if this goes further.
Yeah, because the impact on our legal system could be huge.
No kidding. Okay, so the case of Judge James Boasberg seems like a good place to start.
Right at the center of the storm.
Exactly. So from what we've gathered, he issued a temporary restraining order. It was to halt the deportation of some Venezuelan nationals. And the administration was trying to use the 1798 Alien Enemies Act.
Wow, going way back.
Yeah, right. And get this. The group included alleged members of the gang Tren de Aragua.
Oh, wow. So this was high-stakes stuff.
Definitely.
Yeah.
But here's where it gets really interesting. A plane with these individuals actually left for El Salvador after the judge issued the order.
So they basically ignored the order.
That's what it seems like.
Yeah.
And Judge Boasberg was not happy about it. He demanded answers from the Trump administration, wanting to know if they knowingly defied his order.
Makes sense. You can't just ignore a judge's order.
Right. But the administration's response, well, he called it delayed and insufficient. And to top it off, a regional ICE official even claimed potential state secrets privilege.
Oh, wow. So they're really stonewalling.
It seems that way. So you can imagine how this played out.
Yeah, I bet President Trump had something to say about this.
You bet he did. He immediately called for Judge Boasberg's impeachment, and he didn't mince words. Called him a radical left lunatic for blocking the deportations.
So this brings us to the heart of the matter. Why are some people saying these judges should be impeached?
Well, the argument goes something like this. They're saying that by blocking the executive branch's actions, particularly on immigration, which is a key area for the executive branch,
Yeah, that's their domain.
right, these judges are basically obstructing the administration of law as laid out in the Constitution.
The argument is that judges are there to interpret laws, not to prevent the president from enforcing them.
And they're saying that halting a deportation order is a pretty clear example of a judge overstepping their bounds.
Stepping on the executive's toes.
Exactly. And if we look back a bit, MSNBC pointed out that this isn't exactly new territory for President Trump. He's got a history of publicly criticizing judges who rule against him.
And praising those who rule in his favor.
Of course. It suggests that he sees judicial decisions as good or bad, depending on whether they support his policies.
Which some would say is not how it's supposed to work.
Definitely raises some eyebrows. And then there's the case of Judge Anna Reyes. Breitbart really focused on this one. She blocked the Trump administration's ban on transgender people serving in the military.
Ah, yes, that was a big one.
And it led to accusations of judicial activism, basically saying she's pushing a political agenda instead of just interpreting the law.
Okay, so let's dig into the specifics here. What exactly are they criticizing Judge Reyes for?
Well, one thing Breitbart mentioned was that she referenced the musical Hamilton in her ruling.
Oh, really?
Yeah, seems a bit out of place in a legal document.
It does. I mean, judges are supposed to be serious and impartial.
Right, exactly. And referencing a musical, even if it's a popular one, could be seen as, not taking the legal analysis seriously enough.
I can see that point. But what else?
Well, there's also the criticism that she relied on outside research, stuff that wasn't part of the official court record,
Yeah.
specifically about disorders of sexual development.
That's interesting. So the argument is she should only consider evidence presented in court.
Yep. They're saying if a judge brings in outside info, it basically sidesteps the whole process where both sides get to argue their case based on the same evidence.
Yeah, that's a key part of our legal system. Everyone gets a fair hearing.
Right. And then there's the part where she questioned a DOJ attorney about his religious views.
Wait, really?
Yeah, and even asked what Jesus would say about the transgender troop ban and homeless shelters.
Whoa, okay, that's definitely crossing a line.
It does seem pretty unusual for a legal proceeding.
You think the DOJ had something to say about that?
Oh, they did?
Mm-hmm.
Breitbart reported that the DOJ actually filed an ethics complaint against Judge Reyes because of this.
Not surprising.
The complaint focused on those specific comments and questions. They said it was inappropriate, totally irrelevant to the case, and made the DOJ lawyer uncomfortable.
Yeah, I can imagine. And Breitbart also mentioned that she apparently said WTF at one point during the questioning.
Yeah, not exactly what you'd expect from a judge.
Doesn't sound very professional.
Right. And to add fuel to the fire, Breitbart also highlighted Judge Reyes' statement during the hearing, where she questioned the whole idea of two biological sexes. She cited intersex people as evidence.
Hmm, that's a complex issue.
It is. But her statement, combined with her history of left-wing activism and donations to Democratic causes,
Right, they dug all that up.
it all feeds into the argument that she's letting her personal beliefs influence her rulings instead of sticking to the law.
So basically, they're saying she's biased and obstructing the president's agenda.
Exactly. But of course, there's another side to all of this.
Yeah, I was going to say, what about the people who are defending these judges?
Well, Chief Justice John Roberts has actually spoken out about this. Both MSNBC and Politico covered it. He basically said, look, impeachment is not the answer just because you disagree with the judge's ruling.
Makes sense. There's a whole system for appealing rulings.
Right. That's what the appellate courts are for. Impeachment is supposed to be for something way more serious than just a difference of legal opinion.
So what does the Constitution actually say about impeaching judges?
Well, MSNBC laid it out. The standard is treason, bribery, and other high crimes and misdemeanors. And most legal experts agree that this means serious misconduct, usually something outside their role as a judge.
Not just ruling in a way someone doesn't like.
Exactly.
Okay, but let's be real for a second. Impeachment is ultimately a political process.
That's true. MSNBC made that very clear. The House of Representatives gets to decide whether to impeach, and then the Senate holds the trial. And Congress sets the rules for the whole thing.
So even if some people think these judges should be impeached, it's not a slam dunk.
Not at all. Especially with the current makeup of Congress. MSNBC pointed out that Republicans have a slim majority in the House, and you need a two-thirds vote in the Senate to actually remove someone from office.
Yeah, so it's a steep climb.
Very steep. And Politico talked to a lot of current and former judges, and they basically said that President Trump's calls for impeachment are not only wrong in these cases, but they're also dangerous for the whole idea of an independent judiciary.
Right, because judges should be able to rule on the law without worrying about political backlash.
Exactly. And they're saying that these rulings just don't meet the bar for impeachment.
Not even close.
Politico even quoted former federal judge Nancy Gertner. She said these rulings don't even come close to the threshold for impeachment, and she called the threats nothing short of horrifying.
Strong words.
Yeah, and former federal judge Bernice Donald also chimed in. She's worried that this will make judges afraid to enforce the law properly because they don't want to get attacked by politicians.
Which would be a disaster for our legal system.
Totally. And even retired Supreme Court Justice Stephen Breyer agreed with Chief Justice Roberts. He told Politico that impeachment is for actual misconduct, not for disagreeing with the judge's legal interpretation.
Makes sense. So we've got these two very different perspectives here.
We do. On the one hand, you've got President Trump and his supporters saying that these judges are overstepping their boundaries, obstructing the executive branch, and maybe even acting out of political bias.
And then you've got people defending the judges, saying that judicial independence is crucial, that there's a process for appealing rulings, and that impeachment should only be used in very extreme cases.
And both sides have some pretty strong arguments.
They do. And this whole situation really highlights the tension between the different branches of government.
It does. And it raises some really important questions for all of us. What's the right balance of power? When does a judge go too far? And what are the consequences if impeachment becomes a political weapon?
Big questions with no easy answers. So Politico brought up another interesting point. They said that a judge appointed by President Trump, Fernando Rodriguez Jr., also blocked a Venezuelan deportation on the same day as Judge Boasberg.
Oh, well, really?
Yeah, but we haven't heard anyone on the right calling for him to be impeached.
That's a really good point. It makes you wonder if the criticism is more about the outcome of these rulings rather than some grand principle about judicial overreach.
Right, if it was just about overreach, they'd be going after all the judges who made similar rulings.
Makes sense.
And then there's Elon Musk jumping into the fray. He's been pretty vocal about supporting an impeach-a-thon, targeting multiple judges.
I saw that.
Yeah.
And both MSNBC and Politico reported that he even got some facts wrong about how many votes are needed in the Senate to remove a judge.
So now you've got misinformation being spread, which just makes things more confusing.
It really does.
Yeah.
So to sum it all up, we've got this big debate going on about whether these judges have gone too far and whether impeachment is the right response.
And it's not just a theoretical debate. It has real consequences for the future of our courts and our democracy.
It does. Because if judges start feeling like they can't make rulings without risking their jobs, it undermines the whole system.
Exactly. They're supposed to be impartial, applying the law as they see it, not as politicians want them to.
And I think that's the key takeaway for our listeners today. This is a really important issue to pay attention to. It's about more than just a few judges. It's about the balance of power in our government and the future of our legal system.
It really is. And it's worth taking some time to think about the long-term consequences of what's happening here. What kind of precedent are we setting? What message does it send to judges across the country?
Those are great questions, and I think they're ones that we as a society need to grapple with. So, as always, we encourage you to keep digging into this issue. You can learn more about the history of judicial impeachments in the U.S. or look into the principle of separation of powers. There's a lot to unpack here. Thanks for joining us for this deep dive.
Well, I don't know about you, but I think that these judges who exceed their constitutional authority should be impeached. But what do you think? Leave your comments below and subscribe for more.